And welcome back to the Ketogenic Fasting Project. Um, Today I'm talking about the threshold concepts. We're going to reflect back on the idea that we get our calories primarily from three substances: the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And between those three, you pretty much only get calories from them. As I mentioned before, you can get calories from other things like alcohol, ethanol. But we generally don't talk about them as primary sources of calories. So of course, for some people that's not the case. But most people who get a lot of calories from drinking alcoholic beverages get more calories from the stuff that's mixed with the alcohol than the alcohol themselves, because not too many people drink straight alcohol. So, and those that do, even a person who drinks frequently generally isn't working on their diet. So, you know, we kind of ignore it. So, in the idea of trying to figure out what is the right thing to eat and how much of it to eat, we have this concept of a threshold. So, people who are insulin resistant or have metabolic disease or metabolic disorder, they typically have a very low threshold for carbohydrates, as noted by their autoimmune diseases, the accumulation of adipose tissue or excessive fat. The other thresholds can be a little bit less apparent. And of course, most people with metabolic syndrome or most people are obese or have type 2 diabetes. They spent decades getting into that position. Of course, that's changed now some because you see a lot of kids, children, young people who have type 2 diabetes and are overweight. But in the past, it took a lot longer. But it's probably a sign that the carbohydrate threshold is very low, and it's probably very low because of the food that has been consumed. So, in a perfect world, we might have all lived on some sort of paleo style diet, and things might have stayed in check, and we wouldn't have a low carbohydrate threshold. But a lot of people do, and that's why things like the ketogenic and the carnivore diet are so popular, is because they're a way to correct that metabolic disorder. Measuring a carbohydrate threshold is probably one of the easier things to do, because you can track your blood sugar. You can eat something in isolation, so just eat one food, particularly carbohydrates, and you can check your blood sugar. I'd say if you really want to know, check it after an hour, then check it after 2 hours, and check it after 3 hours. You should see kind of a curve while that food is being digested. You should see your blood sugar go up, especially if it's some sort of carbohydrate. And I'm no expert, but I like to try and keep my blood sugar under 100. Um, and it took some work to get to that point, because a lot of times I wake up in the morning and it would be over 100. So that's a common phenomenon known as the dawn effect. I don't even know if it's really a phenomenon. It's basically your body getting ready to wake up. So, but even after you've been on this diet for a little while, it may still be over 100. Once it starts coming down below 100, when you wake up in the morning, you're probably more likely to be fat adapted, and probably a little less sensitive to the food you eat. So you can use the glucometer or blood sugar testing device like this to find your carbohydrate threshold. So if you eat something, and then hopefully you can keep your blood sugar below 100 even after you eat it. 2 hours after, hopefully it's below. And in theory, if you're on a ketogenic or a carnivore diet, you're not going to be getting numbers uh, over 100 anyways, especially after you've been on it for a while. Maybe in the beginning, if you got a lot of sugar in your body and it needs to be burned off, then it could very well be released into the bloodstream at various times. This is a meter you can measure your blood ketones with, or your beta hydroxybutyrate levels. It works the same way as the glucometer. You prick your finger, take a drop of blood, put it on a little test strip, put it in the machine. The machine calculates your blood lipid, or your blood ketone body level based on that. If you're having really elevated ketones all the time, you're probably producing more than you need. So a high level isn't necessarily a good thing. If you're out, exercising really hard, or you've got a job that's very physical, and you're probably going to be burning them up. So, but if you got really high beta hydroxybutyrate all the time, then you're probably producing more fuel than you need, and you probably should back off. But we don't really know for sure. But it is sort of a tentative way to look for your fat threshold. But you might also see that if you have a lot of LDL or VLDL floating around your blood, that could possibly be a sign too, especially the VLDL, which I think is the really large particles that carry the uh, fatty acids around. So if they're floating around constantly and not getting absorbed by your tissues and used, then that could be a sign that you're too high as well. And again, this is stuff that people are just figuring out. We don't really know for sure, but it's definitely something I encourage people to look into. And again, too much protein can be associated with high blood sugar. If you saw your blood sugar spike, or you would test it the same way as you do for carbohydrates, that's associated with a process known as uh, gluconeogenesis, where your liver converts proteins into sugar and puts them into the bloodstream. Now, the longer you're on a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, the less likely that is to happen. And people find that their protein threshold goes up, especially the more active they are. If you're one of these athletes that runs long races or does a lot of weightlifting or whatever, you're into jujitsu, or doesn't really matter what the activity is. If you're very active, you're going to typically have a higher protein threshold. If you're putting on muscle, you're typically going to have a higher protein threshold. So those things change over time. But if you were all of a sudden eating, double the protein you normally did, and your blood sugar doesn't go up, then you probably have raised your protein threshold. So you could probably eat more, which is pretty commonly reported. People, especially when they're starting a ketogenic diet, they like keep that protein level moderate so to keep their blood sugar low. And then they find out as time goes on, they're actually able to eat more protein, or their body actually wants more protein. So they're able to do it. And I think that's part of the natural progression from a ketogenic diet to a carnivore diet. So the other thing is total calories. We all have a threshold for total calories, but one of the beauties of the ketogenic diet and the carnivore diet is you get closer and closer to understanding what your body wants, and that's going to fluctuate both with your exposure to a ketogenic or a carnivore diet, your level of activity, because they know now that even a year after you've been on a keto diet, they're still seeing shifts in the way that genes are expressed and the way that your body is handling the diet. There's a gradual adaptation above and beyond that of just being fat adapted, where you can metabolize a lot of fat in place of carbohydrates. So, you're gonna want to figure out what your total calorie threshold is. And generally, if you're eating a carnivore diet, it's the easiest, because you eat a big steak, and then you're like, if you look at another one, you're like, yeah, I just couldn't do it. And then your cravings for just about anything else are gone. Even a big pile of chocolate ice cream or something just never sounds good. And once you get away from that whole thing about being able to eat more calories just because you're changing the flavor profile, it's like guys eating a giant thing of ice cream or whatever. They'll eat French fries to win a contest, because by eating some hot, salty fries, they adjust their palate again, and they get past the palate fatigue by switching up the food. And I think that when you see that even an enticement like changing up the palate doesn't work, you realize, oh yeah, I've eaten enough. This also lends itself to being able to eat once a day or twice a day, or even fast for longer periods of time. Eat a nice big ribeye, and then you're satisfied for a long time. You could be satisfied for 24 hours, or even if it's just 20 hours, you're really not tempted to eat anything else. You see your desire even to have, let's say, a sugar-free breath mint might go away, and you're like, oh, I guess I'm done. And so knowing your total caloric threshold isn't necessarily written in stone. You could test you could use combined tests of your glucose and your beta hydroxybutyrate, or your breath acetone or something like that, and kind of say, oh, they're both getting high. It's probably too many calories, or a limit. I've hit my limit. But a lot of it has, I think, more people tend to be more comfortable with just kind of listening to their body. And it seems like when you really simplify the diet, it gets easier and easier to see what your body is signaling to you. Well, thanks for watching, everybody.